Thanks to Harris and Miriam and Chris for continuing to send in their text messages. Those are some listeners that included their name. 514-790-0800. You can always send me a note. I will do my best to read and respond, but we get a ton of those messages. I do want to highlight one thing before we get to our next guest, and he's Prime Minister right now. I mean, he's still technically Prime Minister. We're waiting for whenever Mark Carney's going to be sworn in. Justin Trudeau sending out this tweet just a few moments ago, and it highlights the good people of Papineau, the riding that he has represented for quite a long time. We're forgetting this, right? I mean, almost 10 years as Prime Minister here. But he tweets this out this morning. 17 years ago, the people of Papineau put their trust in me. They gave me a chance to do good by our community. And a few years later, do good by our country. That's a privilege I'll be forever grateful for. Thank you, Papineau. So there's the message from the Prime Minister to his riding. Get a load of that. 17 years representing that riding. Don't bring it up with Mike Cohen from the English Montreal School Board, because I know he's still peeved over the fact that Justin Trudeau never visited a school in his riding, in English school in his riding over those years. Okay, let's turn our attention to the Hudson's Bay. Are you clutching your HBC gift cards, your points cards? Because Hudson's Bay, Canada's oldest retailer, facing a financial crisis, seeking a restructuring plan to keep around 40 of its 80 stores open. It had a big loss last year, about $330 million to be precise. Mounting debts. Company asking landlords for rent concessions and financial support. Let's head over now to Susan Krashinsky Robertson from the Globe and Mail. Susan, welcome back to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, you must have been covering Hudson's Bay for quite some time now. How do you view the latest chapter in this saga?
Yeah, talk of Hudson's Bay and its financial difficulties have been going on for years. Just a couple of years ago, I was reporting on the company falling behind on payments to its suppliers, the companies that sell them products and services. And that's always a danger sign when a retailer is falling behind on those kinds of bills. And so we knew things were difficult. We also knew things were difficult because Hudson's Bay used to be a public company that had to report its financials publicly. And in the 3 years before it went private back in 2020, it lost money. And then, of course, just shortly after it went private, there was the pandemic. So it's almost a certainty that it continued to lose money. So we know that this retailer has been in dire straits financially for some time, and now it seems that things have caught up with Hudson's Bay.
How Canadian is Hudson's Bay in 2025? I get messages from listeners bringing up investment firms and all this kind of stuff, and I don't know how to answer the question. How Canadian is Hudson's Bay?
This is a question people are asking a lot right now, and it really depends on how you define Canadian, right? So Hudson's Bay's governor and executive chairman, Richard Baker, is also its controlling shareholder. He's an American. That is true. On the other hand, Hudson's Bay is a company that operates currently 80 department stores across Canada, has more than 9,000 Canadian employees. And so it's always a really difficult question when we're asking how Canadian a company is. Are you thinking about whether its ownership is Canadian? Are you thinking about how many Canadian jobs it supports, how many Canadian products it sells? And there's different answers for all of those things. Of course, Hudson's Bay sells a lot of big brands that are not Canadian. It also sells some Canadian brands. So it's really kind of something that consumers have to determine for themselves. What is the thing that they prioritize when they're thinking about what makes a retailer Canadian?
What do you think is the most likely outcome here?
It's difficult to tell right now. It's very early days. But what we know, and what the Globe and Mail first reported on Sunday, is that Hudson's Bay is in negotiations with its landlords, as you said, to try to keep about half of its stores open. That's a big change if they lose half of their department store network across Canada. But that number could also change. It really depends on how these negotiations with landlords go, what kinds of concessions they're able to get, and what sort of plan they're able to come up with. What Hudson's Bay says is that they are attempting to find a plan so that they can come out of the other end of this as a going concern. They'll be a much smaller company if they do survive. Certainly, they're going to have less stores, and they're going to have to operate differently because, of course, this is a store network that has really, in some ways, deteriorated over the years. They have underinvested in their stores. They have made some missteps, and traffic has been falling. So whatever shape Hudson's Bay takes after all of this is over, they're going to have some very serious work to do to win back Canadian customers.
We're with Susan Krashinsky Robertson from the Globe and Mail talking about Hudson's Bay. Let's touch upon that, the traffic, right? And I remember 3 Christmases ago, I went to Hudson's Bay, downtown Montreal. My goodness, it was packed. And over those since then, by the way, I've gone back every now and again. My fiance loves Hudson's Bay. We sometimes order online. I've bought from there over the last few years. But I do remember those 3 years ago. And then since then, I've gone in and it's been Deadsville or empty. But I'm just wondering if that's a Hudson's Bay problem or a retail problem when it comes to that. Is this ailing the entire industry, or is there really the miscues on the HBC side of things?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. Right? It's both. There are factors that are ailing the entire retail industry. Just a few of them very quickly. After the pandemic, people started working from home a lot more often. So traffic into central cities and commuter traffic fell. That affected traffic patterns to some stores. HBC's suburban stores have been doing a little bit better. Its downtown stores have really been suffering. That's industry-wide. It also overbought and found itself with too much inventory after the pandemic that it couldn't sell off, but many retailers found themselves in the same position. They overbought inventory, and then we had this real consumer pullback. If you remember, soaring inflation, rising interest rates, people tightened their belts and stopped buying non-essential things. What does HBC sell? Mostly non-essential stuff.
Yeah.
That affected the whole industry. So there are all kinds of factors, the competition from e-commerce giants. All of that is affecting the industry. But there are retailers out there coping with those competitive pressures and those industry-wide pressures. Some of what has plagued HBC here has indeed been self-inflicted. They invested heavily in an e-commerce strategy that didn't pan out. They hired more than 500 people to try to support that strategy. That's a huge investment. It didn't really yield the financial improvements that they were hoping for. Meanwhile, as I said before, they weren't spending on stores, cutting staff, cutting marketing budgets. They've slashed their marketing budgets. They've, in some cases, cut hours. So the operations of the stores themselves have been suffering. And that gets you into kind of a downward spiral, right? If traffic to your stores is falling, and then you cut costs to try to cope with your falling sales, and then the operations of your stores get worse, and people don't want to come back, and traffic falls further, and on the cycle goes. So there are indeed some internal issues here that aren't simply retailer or retail industry-wide problems.
Susan, I want to read you a text message from a listener, Abdul, and he's a taxi driver in Laval, just north of Montreal. And he says, listen, I pick up most of my pickups at Carrefour Laval, which is the big mall in Laval, are at the Bay. Am I missing something? And, it gets to that too. Like, this is a guy, he's driving all day. He's making the pickups like somebody's shopping there. What is it? What are we missing?
People are shopping there, but it's just fewer people than there used to be, right? And so, yes, it's still, in some ways, a really beloved Canadian brand, a beloved Canadian retailer, and it still has customers. But the problem is, how do you keep those customers' loyalty when you are underinvesting in those operations? And that's the big question. So, it's not to say that people don't visit Hudson's Bay anymore. As I mentioned before, there's suburban locations are doing quite well. There are markets where Hudson's Bay is quite important. And also there are demographics of consumers to whom Hudson's Bay is quite important, who are loyal shoppers and who want to see this retailer survive.
Susan, just to wrap here on this subject, and full disclosure for our listeners, I don't think you're a financial planner or a doctor, but let's just, I'm going to ask you the gift cards, right, that are in the drawers, in the envelopes. What's your advice to listeners right now if they've got those gift cards on spending them right now, or if they can wait this one out?
Yeah, so there's good news and bad news for loyal Hudson's Bay customers. People who hold gift cards for now are able to use those gift cards. Hudson's Bay wrote in some court documents that they think that honoring the outstanding gift cards that are out there is going to promote goodwill among customers and help to sort of maintain the value of the company. So Out in Canada right now, people are holding in total about $24 million worth of those gift cards. So for now, they remain valid. My advice, if I were to give it, would be to spend them sooner rather than later, because restructuring processes are unpredictable. These things can always change. So for now, Hudson's Bay intends to honor those cards, but you never know what could happen in the future, and certainly things are a little unstable. So my advice would be, if there's something that you're looking at buying, sooner rather than later would probably be the move.
Yeah.
The bad news is for people who have loyalty points. So there's about a little over $58 million worth of Hudson's Bay loyalty points floating out there in Canada on people's cards. And right now, those are frozen. You cannot use your Bay card to redeem points or collect points at the moment. So people shouldn't throw away their cards. Hopefully, I think what the company would be hoping to do is emerge from this as a going concern, as I said before, and be able to resume honoring those loyalty points. But for the moment, they're essentially worthless.
Susan, I got to run. A note from another listener, Patty, who's listening to us, says, every time I would pick up my kids from the Fairview Mall, it would be at Hudson's Bay. It was just an easy landmark, but they never shopped there. Just sharing that. So maybe that's part of the issue. Susan, be well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Susan Krashinsky Robertson from The Globe and Mail.